So our first speaker for the afternoon session is Mr. George Fowler. He's a senior project engineer with Woidt Engineering and Consulting in Ithaca, New York. Mr. Fowler's worked in the field of flood hazard mitigation, aquatic habitat enhancement, and erosion stabilization for several years in New York and the Pacific Northwest. He places an emphasis on mirroring natural processes using state-of-the-art geomorphic assessments. And with that, I'm going to have George explain everything he does. We've had some good conversations so far, and he's going to talk about stream corridor management from planning to pile driving.
When I first checked in today, they gave me a handout of the summary of what happened here yesterday, the understanding and enabling adaptive management of socio-ecological systems, basically an adaptive management strategy. And it was given by some folks who came in from British Columbia. And I flipped through this, and in the handout 7, it really breaks down what is strategic in terms of making adaptive management really sustainable. In the second row down, you'll see it says trust and commitment, which is the strength of the relationship between the people who are developing the plan and the people who are actually going to be implementing the plan, the people who live in those areas. So it does tell us that we do have a little bit of things to learn from our brethren to the north, and me growing up in northern Vermont as a teenager, I really appreciate the wisdom of having a younger drinking age. So it does look like we do have a lot of stuff to learn from our Canadian friends. So I'm here today to talk about stream corridor management, and in particular starting from the large-scale planning that can be extended, like these general basin-wide recommendations, all the way down to implementation strategies. And as we go through these 3 steps, think about adaptive management and how we can build trust in the community members who actually live along these stream corridors. So when I think of stream corridor management, there's a lot of plans out there now that have started to gain traction and really build a lot of trust within communities, in particular in terms of flood mitigation strategies. So a lot of that is being presented here today. And then there's also another larger basin-wide plan that we'll also talk about as well that's happening in the Delaware River tailwaters. So when I think of stream corridor management planning, I think of 3 steps. And basically I break them out by what kind of footwear I wear when I go through these particular things. And the first step, your community meetings, you're sitting behind your computer, you're wearing your dress shoes, and you're kind of hanging out and developing these particular strategies for the basin-wide recommendations, and then identifying what data we have to make specific recommendations, what data we need to go collect. So when it comes to the collecting, I notice there's a lot of DEC folks out here, a lot of fish heads, so there's probably a lot of people who have hip waders in their cars hanging out there, and that's the next step when we actually start going out into the field and collecting the additional data we need to make more of these specific recommendations on these stream corridor plans. So think about the first tier is just your entire basin-wide recommendation, very general, ubiquitous throughout the different communities through there. And then as you get down into the more specific, the finer streams, you're looking at smaller watershed area, maybe at a HUC 12 level or even smaller. And then once you finally get into your final implementation stage, you're wearing a different set of boots. You're wearing some steel construction boots. And this is where the kind of the rubber hits the road, no pun intended. So that's where you start doing your construction, your implementation from aquatic habitat restoration, etc. So I'll kind of guide us through these 3 steps, and I'll be bringing up some examples of really some good case studies of where we've had success in building trust with our community implementers, and then at the end give some examples of some habitat restoration projects that we worked on. So first of all, your basin planning, what does it do? What we're trying to do is we're supposed to establish this partnership between the planners and the people who are the plannees, if you will, and work through and kind of understand what's going on within this basin-wide area and try to find similarities between it. And then once we have an understanding of what this basin-wide needs are, we can develop these recommendations. And we can take those recommendations only so far because each particular stream may have a different set of recommendations that fall along with it. So what we need to do is we need to explain, well, talk to us about if your economic development zones, are they in the right place? Or if your future economic zones, are they in a floodplain? If we build them, the people start getting flooded. So we're starting to build rapport with the community. We're asking them their questions. This is this kind of buy-in process, this trust, because I'm an outsider coming into their communities, and I need to build an understanding with them, some rapport, that I actually know what their needs are and how we approach these things. And this is really key, because at the end of the day, I go back home and they live there. And so this document that we're trying to create is a living document, so they can pick it up. You know, the best document that I think is one that's stained with coffee rings and powdered donuts. You know, it's just, they've been using it a lot and moving it forward. So we're starting out trying to define, you know, where do we start with this process? And in particular, where is this basin? And there's a lot of ways to look at it. You can look at it at county level, watershed level, population reach level. But be aware that this, if you look at, say, like a 10 level or something larger than that, or look at population extents, it could extend beyond political boundaries, so you may need to phase that into different counties. And then you start identifying your project partners, people who are in the community already, who have vested interest in the success of your aquatic restoration. Your watershed groups, your planning departments for your economic vitality, and soil and water conservation districts are always a key player for information that's been going on in these watersheds historically. The next step is to develop these technical working groups, these people who are actually going to be sitting down in the meetings and going through the planning phases. And those are your community members who then can listen to the technical information and disseminate that among their neighbors. And that's really your key to this entire process, is having local people on the ground who are going to help. Then during this phase, you start to develop other stakeholders like the DEC, county DPWs, people who have vested interest in either infrastructure or biological capital in these watersheds. Then start developing how many meetings you need to have within the communities, where they're going to be, and then also start fleshing out conceptually like how many of these Huck 12s we need to investigate to come up with these particular stream management plans. And then the next thing is to apply for funding. And there's a lot of plans now out there that are getting funded through using some of the economic routes through the county planning department. There's also a lot of flood studies that are being funded through DEP. And there's a lot of endowments that are starting to set up along the Delaware River reaches, where money is starting to think about, let's just spend money just to spend money. Let's spend money in an informed way. And these plans help direct the funding sources to where money should be spent. So again, there's a lot of data out there. There's a lot of economic data out there that's being developed, whether that's your planning departments or not-for-profits. There's your all-hazard mitigation plans, which is a plethora of resources for where critical infrastructure is located, what things are important when they get damaged, what damages them, and then these comprehensive plans of what is our community now, what do we want our community to look like in 40 years? Because it's great to be able to talk to people like where your community was 40 years ago, and okay, now we're here today because of said reason. So it's not a big jump in extrapolation to say, okay, well, in 40 years, based on what's today's conditions, what your community is going to look like in the future. So these are where these comprehensive plans come in. So all of these documents, we go through and research and be able to come up with these basin-wide characteristics of based on all the communities involved, like where should the growth happen? Do we have information to guide stream corridor setbacks? What's the zoning? All of these things can come out of these documents that already existed. And you can do that, without getting your dress shoes wet in streams. So then you move into the initial public meetings. You go into the communities and say, okay, we have some flood maps. We reviewed them. We understand that you flooded here in Irene and Lee. You had 3 feet over your first floor elevation. Did that happen? You can start seeing, heads starting to nod and grinning. You built rapport with that community. You build that trust because they see that you're not only an outsider, but you're an outsider that understands what's happened. You go through and put together some geomorphic maps and say, hey, do you always have sediment buildup at this culvert? Or do you have log jams over here at this bridge? And you start seeing more heads starting to go up and down. You get even more trust building to it. And that's where this adaptive management, this living document comes through when the planner and the plannees are all building consensus and understand and build this trust through. So at these first initial meetings, you present all this information, you present your understanding, and you're starting to ask these questions. What's important to your community? What do your community wants to look like? Where do you want things to flood, not to flood? Because what we're trying to do is develop a methodology for the next phase, is that if we don't have enough information to present solutions, we can go go out in an informed way to collect the information we need to make these specific stream management recommendations. So then, once we gather all that information, we start putting in maps. Maps is great. If I were to look at a presentation and just have narrative after narrative after narrative, I would fall asleep, especially after lunch. So if you're asleep right now, I'm with you here. That was a good lunch. But if you have maps and you have dynamic figures, people start to really identify, this is my road where I live on, this is where the streets are, this is my house that gets flooded. They really start to understand the spatial connection between these big, grandiose ideas and actually what's happening on their street. So you start putting all this together and then start going through these exercises. Okay, well, this is where you are today. Where do you want to look like in 20 years? Do we need to tweak the zoning ordinance? Or is stormwater really hammering this small tributary? Do we need to change some land use policies? Or look at large-scale wetland restoration in the uplands to attenuate peak floods? So we're trying to really point out these needs and these recommendations, because then once we get to the next stage, we're really trying to categorize what these all are. Like if they fall into 3 different types of categories of needs, like they're either a planning or an economic category, they're a biological category, or they're kind of a hydraulic engineering category. And so you can start to parse these particular needs on the basin-wide level into those particular categories. Because then, once we get there, we then have to start prioritizing these needs. We have, who says that, an eroding bank here is more important than flooding within our supermarket. So you have to come up with these prioritization examples where you have all these needs that you've then developed from these particular points on the map. Then you have to rank those and say, okay, this one's more important for this particular reason. So in this table, just a quick example of saying, okay, well, water quality is important, but it's not really that important, so we're just going to give it a scaling factor of 1. But if the only way in and out of our town for emergency vehicles during a flood is flooded, we have to give that particular point of need a factor of 0.2, 1.2, just to kind of skew the priorities. Because at the end, what we're trying to do is find out if we don't have enough information for implementing specific stream management practices, where do we start? And we need to have a really informed listing of where we start looking to get this data to make these specific recommendations. So by ranking those watersheds, those HUC 12s in smaller areas, one from part number, we can say, okay, the community said we're starting in Castle Creek. That's where the most important areas that we have to go. We're going to go to Castle Creek. Then from there, we're going to go to Fuller Hollow Creek and then move all the way through so that, that the community has told us where to start looking for additional information. So then you take all those points of needs that you've got from your existing data review and from your public input, and you throw them onto the map, and you start looking for clusters of where all these points of needs are, and each one of those points of needs has a score, and once you accumulate those scores within a HUC 12, then you start ranking those HUC 12s. This is a map here of Broome County. We did a watershed flood mitigation analysis following this kind of approach, and so the community and our existing data review really started to tease out which HUC 12s we're really looking at. You even go to a HUC 14 level if you have that kind of delineation to start teasing out depending on basin. This was a huge endeavor, one that I definitely bit off more than I could chew when I did the budget, and that pissed my boss off a little bit. But this is the thing where now is like if you come up with a basin-wide strategy, you can kind of back into how much money you have to look for funding to look at. Do you need to look at HUC 12s, or do you have to go even more of a finer level? But this is where you start to really find where you go into the field and get those hip waders out. The geomorphic maps are another really great way to build community trust, where you say, okay, well, I don't live close to here, I live 3 hours away, but I was able to take this information, GIS information, and develop this map. This is a geomorphic terrain and floodplain terrace map. And what it symbolizes is that the areas in blue are really close to the average daily water surface elevation, usually flood in between 0 and 2 years, return to normal events. The stuff in green gets flooded once in every 10-year storm, the 10-year storm. Then you get further and further out to where you're on the valley walls. And what this map shows is that this is an alluvial fan, which means that you have a very tight, narrow uplands, and then you come down into the reservoir here and it just splays open. And in this alluvial fan, characteristically, the stream moves back and forth across the blues and the greens as it migrates back, as an alluvial fan does. So I had never been in this West Shokin area before, but I was able to put this map together and say, well, you know, here's this blue thread down through here. Has anyone seen any water, or has the stream ever moved through there? And people were like, yeah, the house is down on this end of this, east of the town hall, sees water in the basement all the time. It's actually running through there. And so this map was able to build a calibration point. I was able to say, I've never seen water or fish in the basement before in this area, but that map tells me that it should be there. And that's what we're looking for when we get at this level, is these calibration points where we can get this grinning and nodding, that people understand, like, this is the science, this is the engineering, and this is what they see in their neighborhoods and their communities. So then at the end, once you have that feedback and you get all this other additional data, you can start to rank up the HUC-12s and be able to talk about what additional needs we are. Then you introduce all this and you say, well, here's the HUC-12s that we need to go investigate more. This is the data we need to collect. We can't make specific recommendations because of this data gap. So example here, like we needed more information about this bridge, in particular, some of the bridge opening information, because their economic development center was being flooded. This is a map of that shows the depth of water during a 50-year flood event. The browns are 6 feet or over water depth. You get into the greens, you're more at like 4 to 6 feet, and then you have a 3-foot pond sitting right in front of the supermarket. So, we needed to collect more information to be able to come up with specific recommendations to be able to protect this town. And as we're getting through this process, this technical working group and the planners are working back and forth, and they're disseminating that information among the communities and the town boards. And so they're all along the way, they understand each incremental step of fact-finding, calibration. So when we start getting to really tough decisions at the end of this process, like whether we build a very inexpensive berm or we look at relocating, everyone knows where they came from. And so that's really the critical thing for this adaptive management, is that you go down this one path and everyone goes down that path together, and if that doesn't work out, you can back up that path and go down another path, and that's where the adaptive part of this strategy comes from. So at the end of this phase, before we move into the actual getting our feet wet, we have a report. It just summarizes everything we've come through, our methods, our findings, why we're moving forward in this particular watershed, why we're not moving forward in this particular watershed. So this living document actually lays out the methods, because floods happen, different things occur, and so we need to really be adaptive to something that happens and maybe change some of the priorities. For instance, you have a new biological survey that goes up and actually finds that you have a very fragmented watershed where brook trout can't move through a lot of culverts. That may change the priority of things. So there's a lot of things that need to be included in this final report. But basically, it's a breadcrumb trail of how we got to where we are. So now we move to our next thing, the actual stream management plan. So think of a finer scale. You're down at a smaller watershed level, and you have these general recommendations, but sometimes they're not all comprehensive for each particular small watershed. So then we need more information to develop these specific strategies. And that's where we start getting our boots on the ground, the boots on the ground, famous saying for everything. So you further these develop basement-wide recommendations into specific recommendations along your stream corridors. And once we get into this level, we already know what the particular needs are in each watershed based on those points of needs map that we saw. So we can start to parse them out into those 3 categories, planning, biological, and engineering. And with that understanding, we can then start formulating what kind of approach we need to collect the data. And there's a lot of different protocols out there. There's a lot of different combinations of protocols depending on what kind of need this we have. So in watershed C here, we have gravel blocking culverts, fine sediment water quality problems, erosion threatening infrastructure. So those kind of needs kind of dictate what kind of methodology we're going to be using in the HUC-12. Whereas if we have thermally stressed streams and the eastern brook trout populations in decline, that may require a different protocol to be used. But we've gotten to where we are because the community has told us this is what's important to us, and we decided which way we're going. So once they start seeing that, oh, well, we've actually said that aquatic resources are important, so when we get down to the implementation phase and we're spending money on brook trout restoration, there's no question why we're doing that because we've guided them through this process. So we go through and start selecting the different methodology that we have for each particular method. So there's a lot of examples of what we want to use. So if we have habitat deficiencies in this particular creek, we want to come up with stream management protocols to help identify where do we start working and why. And then we can start pulling out the different habitat protocols of what there are. And this is just a short listing of what is available and is actually recognized for being able to do that. But at the end of the day, once you formulate these particular protocols for each one of the watersheds, then you start going out and collecting information for it, using a GIS information to be able to identify the particular characteristics that are important. So, what the take-home message is that really you have all these competing needs, but they really don't need to be competing with each other. You have economics over here, but then you have fish over here, and they're all going to kind of start fighting for resources at the end of the day for specific implementation projects or construction. But really, there is a common connection between a lot of those because we're in a basin. We're here for aquatic resources. But one of the definitions of aquatic, you're going to have water. Well, and if you have water, you're right next to landforms, and that interaction between water and landforms is geomorphology. And having a good understanding of geomorphology helps guide and connect all of these, three categories that used to be competing with each other, that now we can start talking the same language. For some examples, for aquatic habitat restoration, the question would be, how are sediments and eroding banks impacting our brook trout populations? Well, if we go through this particular HUC 12, as we're trying to develop these specific recommendations, we understand what is it, where is this creek? Is it stable? Is it not stable? This is a very schematic of how changes happen in a stream typically. You go through, you have some kind of disturbance, the stream down cuts vertically, it then migrates laterally to recreate the floodplains, and then it starts to build up its floodplains through an aggradation process, and then it finally reaches this quasi-equilibrium. So we want to understand if we want to fix fish or fish's food sources, macrovertebrates, we want to know what the creek is doing, because we don't want to go in and put in, spend money into a stream that we underestimate where it is in this evolutionary stage, and then our root wads that we build after construction that are in the water, in 3 years, because it's still down cutting, that water level is now 3 feet away, and now we've made these nice root wad monuments that everyone's going to laugh at me for. So we've got to really kind of start thinking about what the geomorphology is on the stream beds that we're developing these recommendations. Another example is, and I don't like to pick on Margaretville a lot, but they're really easy to pick on. This was taken an aerial photo right after Irene and Lee. So the question would be, is our town's economic development center located in the right areas that have to be moved? Well, the thing we're trying to do is prevent yesterday's decisions from becoming tomorrow's mistakes. It's like where we were 40 years ago to today, and where we're going to be 40 years from now. Well, Margaretville, they have a natural pinch point through here in their floodplain, and the yellow arrows show the flow of water during Irene and Lee through here, and the brown lines there's a wider valley wall through here, but once you get to this choke point, the valley walls narrow down, so the floodwaters are naturally constricted through this area. Well, then what happened is that they put in some Fresh Market and CVS right perpendicular to flood flows, furthering choking down the water. And well, what happens? You have a lot of flood going through here, and you can see a waterfall pouring out of the front part of the building. It means the water behind the building upstream is higher than what it is here. So I don't want to pick on Margaretville, but what did they do afterwards? They built it right back in the same place. So these are the kind of things that we spend money on reactive things, and usually ends up costing more money than if we were proactive in the first place. But this is where these instances of these basin-wide and stream management plans come place. We can point out these areas like this is not a sustainable location. You need to change it, or you're still going to get these problem areas. Again, we talked about that geomorphic map, the stream moving backwards, left and right. Well, if I put a static piece of infrastructure like a bridge right in the middle of that, how am I going to make that adaptable? So again, an understanding of geomorphology from the engineering category. So then we move through and we're doing our GRS inventory, and we're collecting all the data of what's going to inform us where to work. We look at pools, we look at riffle frequencies, we look at where large woody debris is it stable, is it not, eroding banks, and we put these all on maps, and that helps guide us to where we're actually going to do what we're going to do. And really at the end, the emphasis with all these plans that I work on, we really have to have a couple conceptual solutions ready to go, because shovel-ready projects are always more attractive for additional funding. So at the end of the day, at the end of a stream corridor management plan, there should be a few conceptual solutions ready to go with a construction price tag on it, just to implement those. So then we're at the last part here. I only have time for a couple of examples, so I'll just kind of steamroll through these. But these are all implementation examples that came after either one or both of these planning processes to get to where we have we're going to need steel toe boots. So we'll just look at habitat frequency and diversity right now, but there's a slew of different ways to approach implementation strategies. So the first one's in Salisbury, Connecticut, which is in the northwest corner there. We identified this particular water body as a historic productive brook trout stream. And so these HUC 12 level investigations happened. We looked at water quality. We looked at the amount of available cover, the riffle frequency, pools frequency. Pools, were they shallow, were they deep, were they thermal, basically being deep enough to provide cool water habitat during hot thermal times, what large woody materials was in there. And so we had 5 miles of stream that potentially we could restore, but we don't have the money like Donald Trump does to be able to provide all the money here to be able to build this. But we were able to look at small things and be able to connect, build little pearls of habitat along the 5 mile reach here. So that's the investigations help guide us to where we're going to do work where and what kind of work we were doing. So here's an example of an eroding bank with no in-stream cover. And then we start putting in this large woody material to build, not only protect the bank, build in-stream habitat during low and high flows. And all this small material is attracted to little small fish. They don't spend energy to stay in one place to feed. It also provides a lot of in-stream cover, but also it provides cover at higher flows, where this is a couple days after, 2 months after construction, and this is at a high flow event. So you can see that even as this water is moving very quickly down through here, you have these little eddies where smaller fish don't get blasted down the stream. So why wood? Why engineered log jams? Engineered log jams are a much more complex structure than single logs being shoved into a log. And this table kind of talks about the effective surface area available to fish and macrovertebrates. See, this area is in the water. This area is buried back into the bank. And that's what you get for an effective surface area, wood exposed that can be used for macros or for fish. But then when you start adding this more jumbled necks through here, which looks messy, but to a fish and to more trained eyes, it's very attractive. You get almost 5 times the amount of effective surface area of wood with very additional work. So why do wood? Why do these kind of complex wood structures? The science is starting to tell us this is where we really see really good benefits to our populations in terms of rebounds for eastern brook and other cold water species. Another example in Sands Creek, there was a HUC 12 assessment done for these 2 particular creeks, identified this area of construction. Again, we looked at installing large woody material along the banks there. Geomorphic assessment told us that the area could be prone to head cutting, and so we needed to do some work in the floodplain and build some floodplain roughening structures. Lastly, this is really cool to fly through this one. This is some work I did out in the Pacific Northwest. This is the Clean Elm site was located downstream of the Bureau of Rec Dam that was put in the 30s. And what happened is that this used to be, before the dam went in there, was a perennial side channel for salmon habitat for small fish that couldn't survive in the faster moving waters of the main stem. Dam went in, this main stem down cut, abandoning this here through here, and now all is just backwater and warmer water through here. So this is my soapbox about dams, and I apologize, it's kind of soapboxy, but dams, they do have a negative impact downstream as well on habitat. They break up the movement of large woody material from upstream and downstream. They also impede the movement of gravel-sized body material moving down through. So really, an assessment downstream of dams is a really good thing to be able to identify. Here we see there's a dearth of information, there's a dearth of good habitat features downstream of the dam than what we see upstream. So for this project, we built 2 engineered log jams. The people in the fishboat were happy because you got a lot of fish up through there. You can see the flow now moving down through that side channel even during low flows. And this is just a quick run through for his aerial photos here. This is a couple months, 2 years after construction. We have really good movement now through here. And then over time, we see a lot more connection, especially to the side channel down here, where we get about 3 more additional miles of side chain total. So with this implementation strategy, through the mitigation, the investigation of 12, we were able to say, well, this is a great site to spend money on. And if we do that, we not only gain habitat right here, but all of this additional site habitat through there. So with that, any questions?